It started. Okay,
Oh, there it goes.
there it goes. All right,
So,
so welcome back. Harriet Tubman and Patchwork Revolution
but bam.
is sort of an edgy concept because it's sort of bringing together uh, two sort of different theories. But the main theory is decentralized resistance. And you know what you said last time that really got me thinking was that one of the incentives is that you're going to get something out of being part of this group, right?
Right.
And so that got me thinking about the nature of the slave ending of slavery, which starts as you get out of, yeah. But I mean the end, the idea that it's you escape, you personally escape slavery. Then there's a sort of collapse of the institution of slavery. So I was sort of thinking what might be nice is a sort of a two-part sort of revolutionary theory, which is one, the actual microcosms of any sort of larger thing, whether or not you want to argue there is a larger sort of revolution to be had. But even if there isn't, I think one of the important things and where egoism comes in is that you will get something out of your any act that you deem
Oh, absolutely. And
revolutionary.
this is why egoism, I think, is so important and so needed, because we deal with the desiccated, rotten, filthy, disgusting, horrible, fossilized remains of the left today. I mean, these miserable bastards were going to protest after protest, selling fucking newspapers with the idea that just around the fucking corner the great proletarian revolution was going to rise. And you know what? Their lives were fucking terrible. Their lives are terrible. That's your fucking landlord today. That's who your fucking landlord is. He's a washed up hippie who dropped acid, who thought about world peace, and when nothing came to him, he's running a slum. Welcome to the passage of time. And that's the one thing that worries me, is all this youth and idealism and the revolutionary movements that we see now. These kids think that it's right around the fucking corner. They thought the same thing in the 60s. They thought the same thing in 1916. There is no guarantees. And so I see all these young people that are putting off so many different aspects of their lives and waiting and waiting and waiting. And just like Max Stirner was writing about, that when the revolution is this grand idealized narrative, basically the rapture for leftists, you just sit around and don't do anything because you think that history is going to fight your battle for you. And you end up wasting your life.
Exactly. That is distressing.
Well, the thing that always calms me down is it's always been this way. It's always been this way. You know, like each new batch of humanity thinks that their struggle is brand new. You know what I mean? Like we think our times are bad. Imagine what it was like in the middle of the Black Death. You know what I mean? Like you want to talk about like, oh, fuck, maybe times are bad. Or again, what we're talking about, the Underground Railroad. You know, these people, imagine Harriet Tubman sneaking back into slave territory 13 different times. She had achieved her own freedom, but now she's going to go back and rescue other slaves 13 different times. And every time she's doing that, she's not only risking death, imprisonment, rape, torture, and yet she goes back again and again and again. And so many people did this. You know, there are diary entries of people that left their children because that's how strong their desire for freedom was. Because they thought if they could just get out, maybe they could come back. And here we are, you know.
Yeah.
We're so beat up.
You know what? I wanted to talk about Harriet Tubman specifically because it's sort of a very like sort of quintessential example from, I would say, mainstream history of a revolutionary sort of practice that it did not involve the state. It sort of and it involved a lot of cryptography, and it involved a lot of signaling between people that are part of this underground network. And obviously, it's more than just Harriet Tubman. It's a vast network of people that are moralistically against the concept of slavery. So I just want to read you some sort of accelerationist babble for 1 second, because I think it's important. Ultimately, power over the realm rests truly with shareholders because they use a secret sharing or similar a cryptographic algorithm to maintain control over its root keys. Authority is then delegated to the board, if any, and the CEO or other officers, if CEO if there is any, and thence down the military order or security forces. And the leaves of the tree are computerized weapons which will not fire without cryptographic authorization. So there are, in fact, people parts of the Underground Railroad network that function within the sort of larger net of, I would say, the American government, and they don't fire or operate as a network of this underground sort of railroad system that is moralistically sort of apart from this sort of totalizing idea of the state, which I think the left is heavily involved in, is event that, you know, the biggest sort of, the biggest grandest game is the state game, but it's not quite like that. And, you know, another part, this is the last bit of accelerationist babble. A religion is a kernel and a church is a repeater, but not all kernels are religions, nor repeaters churches. And to bring it back to the ending of slavery, what sort of acted as the biggest repeater of, it wasn't the essence of the slave revolt or the Underground Railroad, it certainly didn't create it, was Uncle Tom's Cabin, which took stories from escaped slaves and Eliza's story of escaping slavery, and it was a real story, and it acted as a repeater, right? So there you have the slave escapes, good in and of themselves, and then it gets repeated because it is a moral, it is sort of a liberatory essence. It has it, and it collapsed a larger foundation. But even if it didn't collapse a larger foundation, it was good in and of itself. Anyway.
Well, I mean, I don't know. One thing.
Sorry.
No, I had to make sure that the accelerationist babble you were speaking wasn't secretly like an ancient hex you tried to throw my way. So I was touching a whole bunch of like alligator hands and shit down here to make sure I was protected. But
I got this. You know, I actually thought specifically, I was like, oh, maybe I should ask Dr. Bones something. That I was like, no, I better not.
You're not prepared to know.
You never know.
With the thing with here's the thing, and this is the big failing of the abolitionist movement. After the Civil War, Harriet Beecher Stowe, the woman who wrote this, she ended up talking about, after slavery, all these people that had been freed in the South, they were basically looking for work. They were trying to find wages, and so they were moving around. And so Harriet Beecher Stowe and some other abolitionists were like, oh, they're being lazy. Why won't they get there? And it's like, actually, they don't want to work for the same motherfucker that beat the shit out of their grandparents. So the for all of her story, when it came time to treat black people like actual human beings and not idealized forms, she failed. And a whole bunch of the abolitionists did this. And during the Reconstruction, the North sold the slaves down the fucking river. We cannot disregard the absolute travesty of Reconstruction, where Northern capitalists made deals with Southern planters in regards to prison labor and in regards how these people would be moved. The North sold out the former slaves. And so that's one of the things, is when this became a idealized image of people and not actual real human beings with actual real living conditions, it fell apart. Meanwhile, when the Underground Railroad was in operation, these people, perfect example, real quick, the Prairie Guard, okay, when Kansas was a territory and was deciding whether it be free or slave, there was a militia that came to be known as the Prairie Guard, and it was these group of communities that said, look, we're often being harassed by border ruffians from the South. If we put out a call, you come protect us. You put out a call, we come protect you. And these people fought and died along one another. So these towns all knew one another. I mean, on an intimate friendship level, which is exactly what Stirner is talking about. So when the Underground Railroad finally came in and Kansas was a free state, it was moved along these lines of friendship. You could say you didn't need to appeal to Tommy's or whatever party line or how he voted. You knew him as a friend. He knew you as a friend. There was an intimate, deep connection that went beyond ideology, beyond political office, that these same people were tapping into when they met the runaway slaves. And let's be clear, because too many times the narrative pops up that this is some kind of white savior thing and that people from the North were, miraculously coming out. No, the majority of the slaves that were coming out of Deep South, by the time they had reached some of the networks that built up the Underground Railroad, they had got there themselves. That or they were being helped by other slaves. So it was a true commingling of people who, for a multitude of reasons, maybe they didn't like the South, maybe they didn't like slavery, maybe they thought it was against their religion. You had the Quakers and everything like that. Commingling with networks of escaped slaves that were coming back out of a shared love for their friends and family. And so when these two got together, it blossomed into this beautiful network that was able to cover basically almost the entire continent, all the way west from Kansas, all the way north to Canada, and even there were some Florida sailors that were shuttling fleeing slaves to the Bahamas, and it was all done on these sort of interpersonal friendship relations. That's when there was a little bit of breaking down into specific aspects. If you were a conductor, it was your job to move slaves from one station house to the next. Now, again, we're talking about a very decentralized network. You may not have known the next route down the line. You may not have known. This is all you know. But you can get this, and people that can get them farther. That's all you know. Sort of almost like a mafia thing. You know what I mean?
What is it that connects them? What is, if the network is so decentralized that you don't even necessarily know the next step, then how do they get to the next step? That's the question.
Well, that's where you had people who, again, you had station masters that you may have just had a house that if people came by, they could be kept there. And you let it be known through certain networks, other people in the area that you knew that, hey, if people need to, they can come by, stay the night, we'll give them food, we'll give them clothes. You may not have ran anyone down to the next line. There were some people that didn't have that house, and they were taking the much more dangerous operation of actually smuggling these people. There were other people called, God damn it, it escapes me. But basically, there were people that put money into these projects so that people could be paid, conductors could be paid, everything like that. So you had multi-varied interests meeting along friendship circles. You had these abolitionist groups who were able to communicate with one another, run an above-ground campaign as well as a down-below campaign. But again, the big crime, and this sort of goes into Stirner's critique of these idealistic views, was after the Civil War, when slavery as an abstract concept was symbolically defeated, the whole fucking thing fell apart. And the United States left these people to be tortured. They left them to be killed. They left them to be in the most unspeakable living conditions, and then denied them any agency, denied them the 40 acres and the mule they were supposed to have, denied them the ability to work a job. At every level, the freed slave was immediately shoved into an even worse economic condition.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. What do you make of the sort of that white savior complex, I suppose, that did sort of take this ideological form and I guess partially materially engaged with the reality of helping slaves escape, but then maybe fell apart in these sort of ways that idealists fall apart.
Oh, it's the same.
And I'm probably more, and I like to ask you questions because I'm definitely very much, despite my Stirnerism, idealist in a lot of ways. So that sort of part of me.
It's the way I see it. It's the same thing that fucking hit Russia in 1917. Lenin was all good and well as long as he was talking about abstract workers. But the minute he actually met some that didn't want to particularly do it, he did not give a fuck about them. And again, this happens again and again. So we have been trained to think symbolically. And again, we're uncovering a lot of things in psychology now that, human beings, they run on narrative structures.
Yeah.
So we aren't seeing individuals. We're seeing characters in an ongoing narrative that has all sorts of different sort of archetypal forms or how it relates to us. A person that sees you in a Lakers hat isn't necessarily engaging with you as a person. They're engaging with you along with every subconscious desire and image and everything like that they have built up with the cap, with the glasses, everything like that. And, they may see something in you. They saw a kid get beat up one time who was wearing a Lakers cap. So now they feel like they got to protect you a little bit more. So again, in the North, it was very convenient that they were, able to look at this slavery system and not look in their own factories. I mean, there's so many multi layers here. You know what I mean? And certainly, I think we can all agree that the Civil War was definitely not fought out of some altruism that the North, couldn't. It was an economic battle between two halves of the United States to determine who would be the dominant economic function. That's what the war was about. Because interestingly enough, after the war, we have multiple documents basically showing how Northern capitalists made deals that they would not advertise jobs to a certain amount of slaves that had been on plantations, because the plantation owners couldn't function without them. So the sharecropping system was instituted, and the Northern capitalists wanted access to the prison labor. And a grand deal was struck. And again, nothing was done about the Ku Klux Klan. And the violence in 1 year, in one county in Florida, during Reconstruction, a total of 138 Republicans were killed by the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, it was a slaughterhouse down here. And the North did nothing about it. And they wouldn't do anything about it. So as long as we're not dealing, but again, this is why I think personal relationships are so important, because as long as we're dealing with people on an abstract customer, businessman sort of level, you're just going to see people as abstract entities. When we get to know one another, when we enter actual concrete, real relationships and get to understand the material realities we're all living in, then we can create these sort of beyond ideological connections that have been the bedrock of every real revolutionary kernel.
Yeah, I think you have a good point that I think monetary transactions, maybe they're intrinsically dehumanizing or intrinsically create a sort of what is it? That there is a sort of real that the economic system maybe sort of obscures. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, because you become something else. The customer is always right. That's not a person you're talking about. That's an abstract entity that's not even human, that exists in your head. That you have certain behaviors and emotions and everything wrapped up with that. And so you reduce and remove the actual human being out of the equation completely. Just like that person reduces you to worker and treats you accordingly. It doesn't matter about you as a person. Doesn't matter what kind of day you're having. Does not matter. Even if you're having a bad, oh, well, you really should have. And we're left with people chasing dreams, chasing images that aren't real. And again, when we look at the United States post-Civil War, we see the disastrous effects of this. That as soon as the idealized image had been sort of achieved, had been defeated symbolically, and all of a sudden we had real people with real issues, they checked out.
Yeah, that's a great point. So what do you do when you get to that point? Or rather, what is the real person? What is the real person that is beyond, or I think Stirner talks about this a lot, that are sort of beyond these sort of abstract categorizations of people?
Well, Stirner talks about his answer to it is the unique, which again I see as in a very sort of Zen Buddhist way. That you are, in a Gnostic way as well, you are a totally unique, limitless, unlabelable thing. You are a phenomenon in the middle of the universe that defies all labels. Every label thrown on you ultimately reduces your essence and doesn't fully describe you. Now, we live in a world where, we're going to have to talk to one another because, we can't all just be thrown into acid all the time and like, I am an immutable concept. You can't buy booze like that. Trust me, I know. The people at the liquor store are not going to, they're going to tell you to leave. Money, what's money, man? But so again, he talks about personal relationships and union of egoists, and basically, ultimately, it's up to the individual to assert their unique, because you cannot rely on other people to come around to your way of thinking. So you have to refuse to be labeled. You have to refuse to be owned by an organization. You have to refuse to be owned by a party and everything like that. You have to constantly reestablish the world narrative down to a personal level and get back to seeing it as a path, as you walking through this world, not as you, a tiny node in some kind of cataclysmic battle where...
Oh no, you cut out. Oh no, the good doctor.
In nature where it's this and that, again and again and again, and we keep acting like it's something fucking new when it's not. And it keeps fucking us over. So we have to drop it. And again, going back to look at the difference, okay, in the Underground Railroad and maroon communities. Now, maroon communities were founded by slaves, and they ran away from these plantation systems. It was much more viable in the Caribbean. And
I would call that a patch, right? That's why that's part of what I'm trying to get across is these sort of categorizations. Besides just sort of being oppressive entities, you can sort of go into one of these patches, and I would say sort of maybe your local sort of union of egoists, whatever that might constitute, could be a patch. And I'm just sort of like, I'm talking with you, and maybe part of a different patch, but we sort of have a communication, and these sort of communities help us sort of assert, ourselves, and are unique.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the biggest examples, I suppose, of that I know of is the Seminole tribe. Because you have to remember, while Spain was, or basically for the majority of the period up till both the end of the Second Seminole War, Seminole tribe was made up of two distinct, well, we'll say multiple distinct collections of people. You had freed slaves who had been freed by the Spanish. You had runaway slaves who had fled from the South. You had Red Stick Creeks. You had lower creeks that had come much, much earlier. And you had maybe, and I'm talking maybe, one or two bands of Calusa. The majority of the indigenous people in Florida had been wiped out. And so ultimately, this tribe lived different life ways. And so the indigenous people, they lived in a more traditional lifestyle, an almost hunter-gatherer existence, almost nomadic bands, whereas the freed slaves coming out of the South, they lived in farming communities. They had regular houses, they farmed, and these two totally different lifestyles, which the Ann Prims will tell us are totally non-compatible, because again, we're dealing with two platonic fucking concepts that somehow exist better than humanity. So these two different life ways with two supposedly different values that could never lived perfectly in cohesion. And in fact, it was this cohesion that allowed the Seminole Wars to be fought so voraciously, because while the Seminole towns and territory were being taken, black farms in the south of Florida were able to produce more and more and more food. They were able to produce iron weapons. So these two totally different life ways were able to commingle and coexist. They intermarried. They lived together. They spoke the same language. They may have had different religious patterns, because there is significant evidence now that there was some kind of African traditional religion akin to like Santeria or Voodoo in the United States during that time, during the plantation era. So again, these two tribes, while they may have had similar views and certainly commingled them, there is a possibility that these two even had totally different religious systems. So again, different life ways, different modes of living, different religious systems, different territories. If you're looking for arable land, it's certainly going to be different than land with a high amount of game to eat. And yet they coexisted. And they coexisted as one unit. And the Seminoles, mind you. The Seminoles, one of the things that made it so difficult for them to be defeated was every time the United States captured a chief, the chief told them, look, my position doesn't mean anything. Because a decision could only be made by the entire Seminole tribe. So the different bands would basically vote. So every individual unit had a vote. So again, it's this gigantic, beautiful, multiracial, multi-gendered desire to live, not a desire to fight for some platonic ideal. The Seminoles were not fighting to eliminate some kind of platonic solid that the United States represented. They were fighting for survival. They were fighting for their lives, just like the Maroons that fled the plantations were not fighting for an abstract freedom, liberty, or any kind of French Revolution bullshit. They were fighting for their lives. They were fighting for the lives of the people they knew. And so when you build a life, you were able to build something in much more concrete terms that doesn't necessarily fall to abstractions. If I want my life to be better, I'm gonna have to get more food. I'm gonna have to, these abstract notions that somehow I'm living in a shithole shack while I work for Amazon while the fucking revolution comes around the corner isn't gonna fly. When it's up to me to build a life, then the abstractions have to start pulling away.
So then, do you think that people relate with these abstractions only in a sort of negative or worse way? Do these categories or ideals or ideas or platonic forms, are they only hindrances into into humanity, because the way I sort of see it is these sort of forms sort of they come together, even though they are sort of these idealistic forms, and they actually help both sides live more. So through these sort of ideals or forms, there's a sort of cohesion. And then to go to your example, I think there's probably a lot of ideals and social forms that are creating this, what's generally, I guess, a connection via what is conceived as the good, right?
Well, I would say an excellent word for this is ludic. As long as these ideals are carried out in a playful manner and not taken more seriously than the lives of the people we know.
Yeah.
So, for instance, it's all good and well. Like, look, if you want to believe in manhood and you're not hurting anybody, go for it. I don't give a fuck. If you believe in manhood so much that you're going to start beating up people that don't fit your definition of man, we got a fucking problem.
Yeah.
But if it's something that helps you inspire to, get in shape or care and protect people, sure. And again, if you look at a lot of traditional cultures and stuff like that, the myths and the narratives that are told are done that way so that, yes, I don't think that we as a human species are ever going to get past these symbols. I don't believe that. I think that we can interject ourselves with a ludic sense of them and realize that at the end of the day, we're sort of playing around. We are creating our own reality.
Yeah. But the other problem is language is the system of symbols. Like I try not to get too Lacanian, but I think we're sort of at that sort of point where it's, symbols are signifiers that connect with each other, and language is sort of self-referential and is sort of.
Oh yeah, but again,
this get past language, it almost makes no sense to me.
Zen and Taoism tackle this. If you look to the East specifically, multiple philosophies deal with this exact problem, and Zen has a very, very specific tradition, and I'm talking long exercises, apprenticeships to help people realize that language is a trap. So again, you have two of the most fundamental religious traditions of the East. These are, Zen and Taoism are not small potatoes in China, nor and they have taught that, please remember, language is a game, that it's a trap.
And Wittgenstein taught that, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not that it can't be done. And again, in a lot of traditional cultures where you have storytellers and stuff like that, their job is to reinterpret stories, and they know that a story is in the telling. It's who you highlight. And I've written about this as a writer. There's a difference. Anyone that deals with written words will tell you this. There's a difference if there's a massacre and I center my story on a soldier who committed the massacre and is torn up about it.
Yeah, well, like the Vietnam movies.
Yeah, I'm giving
American soldiers who went in and.
I'm giving you a specific frame. Exactly. I'm giving you a specific avenue for your emotional output. Whereas if I frame the story with, the slaughtered Vietnamese, totally different thing. And remember, this goes even deeper than that. You were talking about language. We're talking about unconscious word choice. If I describe an individual again and again as rat-like, burrowing like a mouse, it will build up a sort of psychic, a subconscious image where you regard the character as, untrustworthy, disgusting, et cetera, et cetera. So little tricks even like that you can do all the fucking time.
Mm.
So while we can recognize that language is a trap, even with language being a trap, you'll find it again and again that personal relationships can often triumph against this. The sort of unspoken knowledge. When you have a friend that you've known for 15 years and something happens, you're like, no, I know that wasn't him. I know that wasn't him because I know him. And you can, understand and deal with all these different things and really have a grasp for a person. Or, an ideology comes in and says, so-and-so is the enemy. You'd be like, Shelley? No. We know Shelley. We love Shelley. I've had dinner with Shelley, building up. Now, again, am I advocating that somehow this is going to be completely perfect or that there won't be abuses? Fuck no, because guess what? There's nothing like that. This entire existence is designed with entropy in mind. And again, that's that ludic belief that even the people you trust, you have to realize at the end of the day, nothing is truly all the way sacred. Things will constantly change. African traditional religions with their character or well, the god of the trickster figure, Legba, Eshu, everything like that. He exemplifies this. And so we're talking about a whole religious tradition that centers itself on the idea that, hey, by the way, things will never be all the way what they appear. Things will constantly change, et cetera, et cetera.
What do you make of this guy, Thomas Garrett, who, idealist? He wasn't fighting for his life. And he basically said, he could afford to help slaves out of the Underground Railroad. And he eventually had to pay like a $5,000 fine. And at the trial, he goes, if you see a slave who needs a breakfast, send them to me. What do you make of people like that? Because they're not fighting for their lives. They're fighting they're fighting for a farm.
You're absolutely right. I look at it in the same way that, there are people that will rescue children or go to horribly destroyed places in the earth because they do so out of a Christian faith. Again, the world we live in is not one of black and white answers. Just the same people, again, as I mentioned before, these same people who were writing in abolitionist newspapers, who were talking about the needed freedom, the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, as soon as the Civil War was over, they were calling black people lazy. They were calling them uneducated. They were doing all these different things. So all this white supremacy creeped back up. So again, while idealized images can be great engines of emotion and people being irrational creatures and emotional creatures, that's a great way to drive them. At the end of the day, it is fuel in an engine and cannot maintain itself unless it consistently changes, gets fed, everything like that. And while, yes, there are Christians, there are Muslims all over the world that act kindly and do so out of a religious desire, or you have atheists that view humanity as, exceptionally beautiful in the universe, there are those who, because of that same idealized image, will destroy the person next to them in a heartbeat. When you have people talking about, oh, what do you want to do after the revolution? Oh, I can't wait to be a fucking prison guard. That's your idealized image.
Definitely. I think part of the reason I wanted to talk to you is because I get the sense that you know something, you just know something about the world, in that my sort of categories are broad and idealistic. And I think one of the things that's important is to, I guess, stay with the person and
absolutely
prioritize the person over the category or the the agency or whatever.
Absolutely. See the person in front of you. Deal with, and remember that these things are, again, the whole thing about the Underground Railroad was especially in the beginning. Now let's stress how the beginning of the Underground Railroad was definitely different when it appeared like the Civil War was on. And all of a sudden these radicals and the revolutionaries were able to attach themselves to the state, because when the Underground Railroad first was kicking out, it was not popular. Abolitionism was seen as extremely radical. These people were not liked by society. They weren't. The American worker, the American society detested these people, but they did it anyway. And it wasn't about waiting for the United States to come around. It wasn't about the American worker coming around. It was about freeing people, which could be measured in concrete material means. Did they get to freedom? Yes or no? And again, so much the left today, I think, is afraid to confront these hardcore facts because we are afraid to lose. We stay in our online echo chambers where everything means nothing. We stay away from areas of our life where we can lose. We can be wrong. We can be killed. These people, to harbor a fugitive slave was 7 years.
Yeah.
And these people were doing it anyway.
That doesn't get highlighted with the Underground Railroad is that it wasn't just, slaves escaping to freedom. It was people getting caught and killed.
Oh yeah, people.
Right.
Exactly. There was this one diary I read where these two gentlemen had escaped from the South again. Two slaves that self-rescued and found the Underground Railroad and were able to and they went back for their families, and they lost.
Yeah.
And they were dragged back to the South and horribly beaten, and they didn't survive. I mean, they tasted freedom, they had it, and out of the love for their family, they went back and they lost. One can only imagine the spiritual and psychical pain And then imagine what it was like for their family to see that. That's there.
Good doctor. You have. Oh, there you go. Your camera froze for a second.
If we want to do amazing things in this world, we have to confront situations like that. We have to take those risks. And unfortunately, until the American people get to a point where the risks outweigh the benefits in potential good, people won't. And so why I continue to use the Underground Railroad as a great model is because it was a system that not only worked, not only kept its members safe from infiltration and things like that, at least for the most part, but it allowed them to work in the face of a society that did not like them, that did not want anything to do with them. And again, you wonder, and I wrote about this in my last article, you really wonder what could have been if the Underground Railroad or Harriet Tubman had any inkling what life would be like in our time, if they had known that Jim Crow was coming, if they had known that the Klan was going to be allowed to run rampant, if they had known that the police would still be hunting black people down and executing them in the street, if they had known that the slaves camps would be turned into prisons. Yeah. Nothing changed. The Civil War is a myth, and anybody that takes 2 fucking days in Alabama will tell you that. Come to Two Egg, Florida. That is still a sundown town.
Yeah.
Where people, this shit, again, one of the things that pisses me off about so many leftists out in the Northeast or out in California, they come from these liberal cities and they think that's what the fucking world is.
Yeah.
And I'm here to tell you that.
I was thinking before I had the thought before I was talking with you, I sort of had this sort of cheeky thought. I was like, I don't think I've ever been to America. Like, I've been in California, I've been in the West.
Oh yeah.
Historical America is, the East Coast and the South. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, have I ever been to America?
Oh yeah, have you really seen the American worker? Do you really know? Well, yeah, when I went to Connecticut, the culture shock was amazing. Just at how different the lives are. The level of violence was totally different. For instance, like a recent story right here in Florida, a guy went to rob a Walmart liquor store. He went to carjack someone. They pulled a gun on him. He backed up. He went to another car. He dragged a woman out of her car. She rolled away, opened her trunk, and pulled a gun out and threatened him. So he got driven away by 2 people with guns in the state of Florida before the cops got him. Shit's wild out here, man. It's absolutely fucking wild. And then, just the sheer amount of crimes that people get away with, especially when it's racially based. When you're in the South, you realize that this is the home of white supremacy. This is where it was founded. And I think also the class system takes a very distinct turn here in the South, because the South always envisioned itself as a modern appendage of the English nobility. So your old school Southern money, it's not a matter of, oh, I worked really hard to get no, it's built on my blood is better than your blood. And this is the same, very ridiculous notion that they filled the poor whites with and turned them against, people that were in even poorer conditions. It's absolutely terrible. And again, the South is a perfect example. And one of the things that I'm very wary about, this idea that when the revolution comes, that everybody's going to just jump on board.
Yeah, I think part of, let me float. I think I want to end on this, which is, let me float this idea and you tell me how stupid I am. That's
okay.
Sort of like, that's okay. So let me float this idea. I had this idea that it's, if we wanted, with the immigration crisis and then people being locked in cages and, taken away from their parents, and I was thinking the real revolutionary possibility would be to somehow make Spanish a sort of second language, almost like the first language in the U.S., and that would somehow integrate the United States with Mexico and Latin America, so that they couldn't, they would radically become a part. They wouldn't be able to, be like, oh, I'm English nobility, I'm blank nobility, I'm, because I think there's, people are marginalized by language and by symbols.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And so,
well, I think it's heading that. I think that's one of the things that whether they acknowledged it or not, white supremacists in office, is because the writing's on the wall that Spanish will be. The left, for all of its uselessness, Spanish will be the second language. I live in Florida, South Florida. It already is. Especially Miami. I mean, shit. Yeah, it already is. It will continue to be. That population will continue to grow, and that's what has people scared. That another language. Wow. I think it would be radical. I think it would be revolutionary for, radicals of all stripes to start learning Spanish. Absolutely. Because this is the language of the marginalized and the poor.
Exactly.
110%. But I think, again, we have to beware of getting into those intellectual traps where just learning a language is the revolution.
Yeah.
Or just enjoying Mexican culture is the revolution.
Yeah.
Take that language. And again, look, what are the material, you mentioned the ICE detention things. Okay, what are the concrete material things that could be done?
Exactly.
It could be breaking people out. Possible. I highly doubt anyone on the left is organized that well now. We could be smuggling people away from ICE when they're in town. That's going to require a lot of work. That's going to have to basically require a rapid response unit. That's going to require people to basically do that for a job. Do some people have that ability? I'm sure they do. Are there a lot of people on the left that are going to have the organizational ability to get something like that together? Not in my experience. So again, we're coming at all of these different things that actually can really be done when we're not dealing, again, going to idealized forms, when it's migrant children as a vague abstraction and the United States government as a vague, we can stand by and be like, man. Meanwhile, those are real children with names and histories. Are they in the cage? Yes or no? Yes. Boom, you failed. Congratulations. You're not doing anything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like at the end of the same way that we could get on about back in the day, oh man, slavery is bad. I believe me, when my territory comes up to vote, I'm going to vote no on slavery. That's great, but there are people being whipped to death in Georgia. But hey, thanks for the very kind solidarity there, buddy. I'm sure I will pass it along to the people being murdered that you really, really felt for them.
Yeah. All right, Dr. Bones. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Because I like Hegel. I like German idealism, and I think there's a lot of potential with idealism. But there's that failing. There's the failing of concrete engagement with reality, not just the forms, but reality.
Absolutely. Look, hey, a little idealized, form. You don't want everything to descend into pure, unadulterated opportunism. But the minute we start taking our ideals, our abstractions more seriously than the real physical human beings they're supposed to represent, we have a fucking problem.
Yes. All right, Dr. Bones. On that note, I think I'll hit the stop broadcast button. All right.